Well, hello there, and welcome to another edition of Warbird Wednesday. My name is Fred Bell, and we are finishing up on the German aircraft exhibit today with probably the most recognizable, or one of the most recognizable fighters anywhere in the world, the BF, the 109, known to the Allies also as the ME-109, which was more of a nickname for the airplane. Today, Greg has outfitted me, my hurlistic assistant, has outfitted me today in my Bavarian touring hat. What I should be is touring Bavaria in a VW microbus with one of these things. What do you think, Greg? He's nodding his head. We also have an amazing soda today that I can't really figure out how he pulled this one off, but we are going to enlighten you with that again today. So the BF-109, first of all, it was the most produced fighter anywhere in the world, and it had 33,984 copies made. If you can believe that. That's a lot of airplanes, Greg. It was the backbone of German fighter forces for some time. It actually was designed by Willy Messerschmitt and Robert Lusser. Now, Robert Lusser also has an interesting thing that he did, Greg. After the war, he said, I'm done designing airplanes, and he designed modern ski bindings. So Robert probably went, I don't know how he went from designing a frontline German fighter to ski bindings, but that's what he did. So he and good old Willy got the first flight in this aircraft in 1935. Now let's put that in context. The Spanish Civil War hadn't started yet. The Germans were rearming. As we've talked about before in this series, which, Greg, we're getting a lot of these videos out there, the Germans, the Axis powers, and the Allies were all running away from biplanes as fast as they could. They were into metal airplanes, fabric was going away. But in the mid-1930s, with the speeds picking up and the engineers getting better and better design cues, in other words, they were understanding what was happening with these airfoils, they were headed towards an all-metal, fast fighter airplane, and everybody was going in that direction. The Germans were no different. The first flight of the ME-109 was in 1935. Now, it was known as Project P-34 when it started. The Germans had the problem with the Treaty of Versailles, so the prototype 109s actually flew with a civilian registry, Greg, if you can believe that. I'm not really sure how the Germans planned to pull that one off, that it flew in a civilian registry, but it was clearly a frontline fighter. It had competitors. Its competitors were the Arado, the AR-80, the Focke-Wulf, the FW-159, and the Henkel, the HE-112. But at the end of the day, after the fly-off, the Germans realized that they had a good fighter on their hands. Now, the interesting thing about this was, and the Germans probably foresaw this, but this aircraft actually went with a pretty heavy armament suite with both machine guns and 20-millimeter cannons. And then later in the war, they actually even experimented with this airplane with a 30-millimeter cannon. And I'll get to why that is in a second. The aircraft was an immediate hit. It went to the Spanish Civil War, where it pretty much outclassed every fighter that was in the air. And even the British, when they were getting the reports, one of the things that pushed the British so hard on the Hurricane and the Spitfire was the ME-109, and Britain realizing as they got into the later 1930s that they were going to end up most likely in a fight with the Germans. Some people didn't want that, but the Air Ministry in Great Britain was clearly thinking that they were going to end up in a fight, and they were modernizing their fighters as fast as they could with those Spitfires and Hurricanes. Now, as this aircraft went into World War II, it remained one of the frontline German fighters. It had kind of that lace canopy and you were down in the airplane. It did not have tremendous visibility. It was with this undercarriage, where the undercarriage came out from the center. It was extremely difficult to ground handle, and it had very, very poor visibility on the ground. The other thing that was a challenge with this airplane throughout its entire production life, and you can really see it, we've already done the FW-190, but you can really see Focke-Wulf's approach to ground handling by widening the gear. We're going to talk about that a little more later, but widening the gear and giving the aircraft a better stance. And I think a lot of it was they looked at this measurement when they, with this particular design, when they designed the FW-190. But the other problem with it was it had a very, very small tail. And when we've talked about before, you have that big paddle up front spinning. When the aircraft took off, there was a lot of times the aircraft would roll, because it would torque roll, because you could not get enough control surface into the windscreen, and this aircraft had a roll problem on takeoff. It was notorious for that. Despite all of that, this airplane was flown by the 3 top fighter aces of the Luftwaffe. Between them, they had 928 victories. Erich Hartmann was the highest scoring German pilot in this aircraft with 352 victories. Now, where it really came into its own, the aircraft had a ceiling of about 38,000 feet, was against what's behind me here, these B-17s and B-24s. In strategic bombing, was that the aircraft was more and more pressed into service in doing fighter sweeps to try to stop the strategic bombing campaign that was really crippling both German industry and their ability to move supplies. As that went on, the quality of the pilots through attrition and the quality of the aircraft fell way, way off. It was still being operated, but you had, and we've talked about life expectancy of German and Allied pilots in World War I. If you were flying one of these airplanes after the Allies had achieved air superiority, let's say late 1943, you had a life expectancy in days if you went up with this airplane. Now, the fuel shortages started to ground these airplanes because the Germans could not produce enough lubricants and enough fuel to keep the aircraft running and in the air. So eventually the Germans just weren't coming up, and you've seen those newsreel footage of the Allied fighters on the ground strafing a lot of these late in the war because the Germans just were no longer coming up to offer any opposition. It had some interesting nicknames. The Soviets called it the skinny one. I'm going to give you the plan view there. You can see it, that very narrow fuselage. And the Germans called it the Messer. You know what the Messer is, Greg? The Messer is the German nickname, or the word for knife, the German word for knife, which made a lot of sense with this airplane. So it continued to soldier on even late in the war, although it was outclassed. Ace pilots still continued to fly it, but it really was done as far as being able to offer any real opposition to what was happening in the Allies by, let's say, early to mid 1944. The Luftwaffe was really beaten in the air over Germany. So we're going to put this down, and we're going to talk about, we have like interesting bits and bobs, what I would call it, of German aircraft. This is a German control stick in the airplane, and you can see, Greg can get a closer shot of it, you have the cannon cover so you don't shoot your people on the ground or whatever after you've armed the cannons. There's a bomb switch, and there's an electric arm switch on here as well. So this actually is out of an ME-109. So when you come here, you want to take a look at this. So I'm going to put this down on there, and I'm going to move to my stage 2. Now, Greg I have no idea where he got this soda. I have no idea. Sometimes he leaves me speechless. this is a speechless moment. This soda is aptly named the Nazi Cola. I have no idea what the German underneath it is, and I have no idea where he got this. Do we even really know what's in here? This could be like a leftover weapon from World War II designed to, it's got cyanide in it or something to kill Allied like me. What do you think, Greg? No? He's looking at me. There is no information on this about calories. I have no idea what is in this, but a deal's a deal. And so, although Greg gave me Nazi Cola, I think, maybe Nazi is because it's clear. What do you think? I think maybe that's it. Nazi Cola. Clever, Greg. Very clever. All right, we're going to give it a shot, and we're going to do our tribute here. The name is terrible. The flavor is like Switzerland. It's neutral. There's not much flavor to this at all, but it's got a little bit of a sweet taste to it. It's not repulsive, although the name is, but the soda itself is not terrible. Now, we don't normally do this, but today we're going to salute a guy by the name of Connie Edwards. And why we're going to salute Connie Edwards is Connie Edwards was involved in a movie called The Battle of Britain. And if you have not seen The Battle of Britain, and by the way, I got to warn you, if you watch this movie with your wife, you will probably be beaten unmercifully. So you got to be a real airplane geek. It's a mid-1960s movie, but it is with German Henkel bombers and a derivative, which I'm going to talk about, of the ME-109, but the aerial sequences are incredible. And Connie has passed away. I did not know Connie very well, but he seemed like a nice guy. But Connie's big contribution is that after the movie was over, a lot of the Spanish-built ME-109s went to his ranch in Texas. And they sat there for like 40 years. Connie was a bit of a hoarder. Those aircraft are now being refurbished, including a 2-seat version of the 109, and those will be able to be enjoyed by people. Now, those are after the war built 109s. They're not a 109 that got fished out of a lake and reworked or whatever. These are aircraft that were brought in for the film. But the thing is if he had not done that, we would not have those examples. And as I've said, with a lot of the German equipment, it's just gone. There are no examples of it anywhere in the world, just a lot of these bits and bobs and pieces. So with that, Connie, the fact that you preserved those, I don't know whether you intended to do that or not, I salute you. And get out there and watch Battle of Britain, and make sure you watch it in a neutral setting to where your wife won't beat you if you watch it. Because you don't want to get beaten up over an airplane movie. So I'm going to put down my Nazi soda there, and I'm going to move on. So, like all of the other German examples of aircraft we talked about, at the end of the war, the Luftwaffe stood down. These aircraft continue to be flown by a number of air forces in low numbers, let's say 600-ish, and they went on, and then eventually they passed into history. About 1965, the Spanish were the last operator. Now, the giveaway on the Spanish-built airplanes, and when you watch that movie, Battle of Britain, I'm telling you about, is the cowling on the bottom of this airplane. Those after World War II built aircraft is more bulbous because of the way the power plant is in there. It was a Hispano power plant or a Rolls-Royce engine. There were a couple of different fittings. But the engine in these was a little bit different. So because of that, the cowling on the airplane is different. So for you aficionados out there, when you see that kind of bulbous cowling and you don't see this type of intake on the bottom, that is definitely a post-war or a modified version of 109 that has had a different power plant added to it. A few of them do fly in air shows. There are videos of these up on YouTube and other places that show you the ground handling issues that I've talked about. and with them ground looping them and having other problems. There are some original aircraft actually that have been restored or have been rebuilt from work numbers of aircraft that have been picked up off the bottom of lakes and crash sites. But like all the other German equipment, they have pretty much passed on into history. So the influence, what was the influence of the ME-109? Well, it was a basic fighter for the Germans. They cut over to these all-metal, very fast airplanes. There's no question that when you look at P-51s, P-47s on the American side, to a little bit the P-38, they were using this airplane as the gold standard and the performance to beat. They had a good idea what this airplane could do, and they were all designing to beat it. I also would say, Greg, and this is my opinion, is that Kurt Tank looked at the landing gear on this airplane, and with the Focke-Wulf 190, which was designed in a relatively the same time frame, he looked at this and said, that's a terrible design on the way the gear is, and he spread that gear out on the FW-190. You can definitely see, and I'm going to stick my neck way out here, if you talk about the FW-190 or you talk about the 152, the derivative, the 152 derivative of the Focke-Wulf, the longer nose version of the airplane, you can definitely see that influence on the Bearcat. We've talked about that before, but if you look at the Bearcat, so a lot of these airplanes had these lineage influences on other designers, and I think this gear design, there were other aircraft designers that went, yeah, that just doesn't work. So that I think was one of its major kind of influences and driving force on some of these other aircraft. Now, if you want to build your own ME-109, you can do this, Greg. You can click on this link for these things. I'm going to try to build one of these one day. This is a metal earth, and it's actually like a 3D version of the 109 that you put together. I'm going to try my hand at one of these one day, but this is kind of cool. They look cool, and they can end up on a little display stand. But you know what you do? You just click on that link, and Jason will happily send one of these out to you. Now, we cannot do all of this without your generous donations. So if you liked what you saw today and you want to support our work, click on that donation button. Give us a little donation today. We can certainly use it. If you have stumbled across my Bavarian hat tooling through the Alps on YouTube and you like what we did here, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, recommend us to your friends, and like us on YouTube, like us on Facebook. We're going to venture into other Axis fighters next week. We're going to start off with some Japanese aircraft. So we will be back. My name is Fred Bell. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. Thanks very much. Have a great day.